Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Jeff's Baking Blog. Today I'm going to be making something called chocolate financiers. Now, I've made these before on my blog, and in that I use trimoline or invert sugar. Today I'm going to use golden syrup instead. Now, the reason for making these in particular is that I made them when I was in Canada, and my great nieces, who are called Grace and Claire, absolutely loved them. So I thought I'd do a video today so they could see how they're made. So this really is for Grace and Claire. Now, our ingredients are 250 grams of icing sugar, 120 grams of plain flour, 250 grams of ground almonds, 340 grams of butter that we're going to turn into beurre noisette on the pan, 305 grams of egg whites, and I'm using egg whites from a carton rather than individual eggs, and 40 grams of cocoa powder, plus 100 grams of golden syrup. Also, I've not weighed out the golden syrup yet. I'm going to do that direct into the bowl with a squeezy bottle, simply because it makes less mess and less washing up. So the first thing to do is to sift our icing sugar and the flour and the cocoa powder to get it nice and light. I've got cocoa on my fingers now, making a mess. The only reason to do this is to get the lumps out. Oops. And in particular in icing sugar, it tends to clump together quite a lot, and so does cocoa powder. So we have our icing sugar, cocoa powder and flour sifted, and I'm just mixing it together. Now, you can sift in at the same time the ground almonds if they're fine enough, but I always find it's just as easy to mix those in once you've sifted the other ingredients. So when you've done that, you can pour your eggs in. I'm putting them on a scale, not to weigh the eggs. I'm going to pour the eggs in like that. And then I'm going to turn the scale on, set it to 0. If it will work properly for me. That's better. Change to grams, and then we're going to squeeze in 100 grams of golden syrup. As I said, the last time I did this, I made invert sugar trimoline, which is a laborious process, and to be perfectly honest, having tried it with golden syrup, it works just as well and is much easier. You could actually just use extra icing sugar as well, of course, but I think the liquid gives these a nicer texture. So it's just a question of stirring those ingredients together to make sure they're all combined. Get right to the bottom of the bowl because the sugar tends to lurk there. So I have here a spatula that allows me to scrape the bottom of the bowl nicely to make sure there's no sugar that's not mixed in. And because I ground these almonds myself, some of them are just a little bit chunky, which is going to give a nice flecking to the cakes. So that's that mixture done. Now the next thing to do is to make beurre noisette. Now the thing about beurre noisette is that it is butter melted and allowed to simmer until it just begins to turn a golden colour and it adopts a nutty flavour. You don't want to do it for too long. Now hopefully we're going to get some noise off this cooking pan as it bubbles, and as you will hear the change in the noise, and when you hear the change in the noise, the bubbles reduce. That's when it's done. So first of all, we'll put the butter into the pan and allow it to melt. And what we listen for is when that bubbling stops, when the noise stops and the bubbles begin to disappear. At that point, we'll have our beurre noisette. If you're using a pan that doesn't have a black bottom, then you can actually see it changing colour as well, much better than you can in this pan. As you can see, it's gradually disappearing. And it's turned into a froth now. and it's a nice nutty golden colour. Now if you cook it too long, you'll start to get, the butter will start to burn and you'll get black bits in it. And if that happens, you can put it through a sieve. But mine's okay, and the next thing to do is to pour it straight in, hot, into our mixture. And then we just stir it in till it's all combined. So, as you can see, the mixture's nicely combined. All that butter's been incorporated. I can see some nice almond flecks in there. So what we have to do is we have to let that cool down, and then, I mean it's quite cool already now, but we let that cool down and then we cover it with cling film and we refrigerate it overnight, or in my case, because it's currently 7 o'clock in the morning, I will refrigerate it until mid-afternoon. And then we put it into a piping bag and pipe it into these little moulds. They're silicone moulds. If they look dirty, they are clean. I've washed them and I've dried them and they always go smeary. This will make about 36 individual ingots of chocolate Financiers, and every one of them will taste simply delicious, as Grace and Claire can tell you, because they loved them. They absolutely loved them. So I will be back with you later today when this is chilled, and we'll put it into a piping bag and pipe it. And at that point we need to preheat our oven to 220 Celsius or 200 Celsius if you're using a fan oven, and I think that's about 440, 450 Fahrenheit. So I'll be back with you to do the next step as soon as we've finished chilling this. Well, welcome back, and 6 hours has passed since I put the batter into the fridge to cool. So what I've done is I've put it in a piping bag and I've just cut the tip off the bag. I haven't bothered with a nozzle, and I've greased my silicone moulds. I also have my oven preheating at 220 degrees Celsius, 200 Celsius with a fan, and that is actually 330 Fahrenheit. I checked that in the intervening time. I just check if I'm up to temperature. I'm just about up to temperature. So the next thing to do is to pipe this out into our moulds. Now it's quite stiff at the moment, as you can imagine, because it's chilled, and you want to pipe it out to fill the moulds to about 2/3 full. As you work it, it will gradually get softer and be easier to pipe. So that's our first 12 piped out, and it doesn't have to be neat and tidy because the batter will soften and level out during the baking. So that's good enough. Now this is going to go into the oven for 10 minutes. During that time they will bake nicely. It'll go crispy on the outsides and stay soft in the middle, and then as they stand and cool down and you put them into a tin or a container, an airtight container, the outsides will soften as well. But I'll be back with you when I've baked all 36 or however many I get. So I'm back and I'm just taking the last ones out of the tin. As you can see, they're nice and soft and bendy. They firm up a little bit as they cool down. And I think I didn't quite fill all the pans to 2/3 because I had some batter left over after making 36. So I just popped some in some muffin tins to make the last few, just to use up the batter. I've also eaten a couple already, and very tasty they were. I've piled these ones up on top of each other to make room on this tray, but they've already cooled down quite nicely. This pan's rather hot, so on with the glove. I'll just have a look at these. Yep, you see, so you can make them in a muffin tin just as well. You just have to put some swirls of batter in the bottom. You don't need to fill it even to halfway to make them. This is a bigger one. Put that on there. So these are them, and they're hot, so I'll take a cold one. That's hot. So here's a cold one. Break it open, nice inside. That's so lovely. And I can just imagine Grace and Claire wishing they had one as well now. And you can probably see that there's flecks of almonds showing through. That's because I ground the almonds myself in a coffee grinder, which I hasten to add. I never use for grinding coffee because I don't drink coffee. And so maybe it wasn't as fine as you might buy in the shop, but it's still very good, and I quite like the effect of the speckles of almonds showing through. So all in all, that's a very successful recipe. Works perfectly, and they're ideal with tea or coffee, or even just as a little snack at any time you want. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this video, and I hope you'll join me again soon when I'll be doing something else. So in the meantime, happy baking.